So in this video, we're going to look at the legislatures, and we are going to continue where we left off in the previous video. In this video, largely going to look at 1892. So while the British government would have wanted to carry on the administration of the country without making any further allowances to the Indians, the nationalist agitation had some effect, albeit very little. But the Indian Councils Act of 1892 was now enacted. The number of additional members was now extended from 6 to 16 in the Imperial Legislative Council. Non-official members of the Legislative Council were to be nominated by members of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and provincial councils. Non-official members of the provincial legislative councils were to be nominated by members of universities, district boards, and municipalities. You can see remnants of this law even today in India's local government laws, right? Where members are nominated by universities, district boards, municipalities, etc. So it was considered the first move to include native elements to take part in the governance of the country. The members were given a right to discuss the annual budget, but they could neither vote nor move a motion against the proceedings to amend the budget. So if you remember in the previous video, we had said that discussion about the budget and voting to amend the budget was one of the demands of the nationalists prior to 1892 when the 1861 Indian Councils Act was enacted. Now in 1892, a part of this demand was included. That is, the budget could be discussed, but it could not be voted upon, it could not be amended. So it was as good as being useless. The only good thing there was that if the budget was lopsided in the favor of the British, which it always was, then Indians could make a statement within the house. Now, to make matters worse, the reformed Legislative Council met for only 13 days a year till 1909, just 13 days. Official majority remained. The number of unofficial Indian members present was only 5 out of 24. The Act of 1892 was a mockery of the demands of the nationalists, and that is the way they saw it as well. The councils were still impotent, and despotism was the rule of the day. The unofficial Indian membership was less than 25% of the strength of the Imperial Legislative Council. The nationalists by now were demanding a majority in the legislative councils. The right to discuss the budget was given, but not to vote or ask supplementary questions. The nationalists wanted the control of public purse, albeit through the control of legislative councils where Indians were to be a majority. But there were only 5 Indians in the entire council. It was Dufferin who had prepared the outline of the Indian Councils Act of 1892. The idea was to include a few more Indians into the legislative councils, which would continue to remain as powerless and impotent as before. Hence, it was a plot to include the more vocal Indian political leaders into the colonial political structure where they could let their steam off and not create problems outside the legislative councils. The representatives in the legislative councils could only make wordy speeches and indulge in empty rhetoric, while the administration and the bureaucracy could afford to pay no attention to them. This will continue to be the theme at least until 1937, when the official Indian majority brought Indian political leaders into power. So, in a way, it was the Government of India Act of 1935 and the elections held thereafter, which had legislative councils in power in 1937, that Indians first had some kind of a self rule. Although the plot was devised perfectly and Indians could only indulge in rhetoric, the British seemed to have underestimated the drive and motivation of the nationalists. They transformed the powerless and impotent councils, designed as mere machines of endorsement of government policies, into forums for ventilating popular grievances, mercilessly exposing the defects and shortcomings of the bureaucratic administration. The government was criticized for its economic policy and on all matters of expenditure and public finance. What the British had hoped for was that the nationalists would become absorbed into the councils and the lure of status and power of being a part of the council. The Indian nationalists were one step ahead. They made speeches criticizing bills that went against the interest of the Indians and used the councils to enhance their own status as Indian leaders. It is necessary to understand the atmosphere that the nationalists were operating in. It was not as it was today. We were under alien rule, under a despotic rule. This was a period when even mere dissent with the policies of the government was met with iron fists, slapped with an iron hand, and made to disappear behind iron veils. What the nationalists were doing in the legislative councils was nothing short of revolutionary for that period, day, age, and circumstance. By the sheer courage, debating skills, fearless criticism, deep knowledge, and carefully marshalling of data, they kept up a constant campaign against the government in the councils, undermining whatever political and moral influence it wielded and generating a powerful anti imperialist campaign. This anti-imperialist campaign would go on to burgeon, and then you would have the Swadeshi movement come out as a result. The role of media in bringing out these criticisms and the details of the debates cannot be overstated. We have previously discussed how the nationalists cleverly used the media to their advantage. Many major leaders, including Tilak, Gokhale, Firoz Mehta, Surendranath Banerjee, Anand Mohan Bose, Anand Charlu, Veera Raghavacharya, Madan Mohan Malviya, Raj Bihari Ghosh, they all served as members of provincial or central legislative councils from 1893 to 1909. All the names that you see that we just listed, they are not small people. They were the mainstream leaders. What the British were trying to do was to bring the mainstream leaders into the legislative councils and make sure that they would not create problems outside. But all of these leaders had better stratagems than the British. It was a period when the national movement was beginning to gain traction thanks to the analytical minds of Gokhale and Firoz Mehta, who were called the bete noir of British officialdom in India. But more importantly, this was due to Tilak's bravery and groundwork, which eventually led to the Swadeshi movement and later on the Home Rule Leagues, and finally the non-cooperation movement led by Gandhi, who considered Tilak to be one of the greatest leaders and considered it to be an honor associated with his name. If it were not for Tilak, the groundwork necessary for a popular movement could never have been achieved. If it were not for Gokhale, the vitriolic critique of Britain in the Indian newspapers would not have been possible. The stepping stones to the national non cooperation movement would be the Swadeshi movement, and we will look at it in the video to come. Thank you.